It's almost like feminism as a movement, as a word, as a concept has been so miscommunicated and misconstrued over social media, traditional media, and politics over the years that it's almost become something that women are wanting to turn away from, which I feel like if these women knew what it actually was, they would not be thinking that way at all. Hello and welcome to another episode of Vaguely Related. Today the topic is the polarization of feminism, specifically in politics and pop culture in social media. Got a lot written down for this one, got a lot of sources to get through, so let's just get started, I guess. So I had about 100 different topics I could have chosen from for this essay, but feminism is something that really came to the forefront because as long as I've been able to make my own opinions in this world, I have called myself a feminist. I'm a woman, that is usually the baseline. But lately I've noticed that even the word feminism has started to have kind of a negative connotation recently, which really confused me until I started looking into it and found what I saw were two distinct sides of feminism that seemed to be stopping it from propelling the movement forward at all, and is frankly a big problem. I just think about it where a few years ago, if someone asked if I was a feminist, I would say, duh, of course. But today it seems like you almost have to qualify yourself. If someone asks if you're a feminist, you say, yeah, but it's not like I hate men or anything. And that's kind of where I want to start, is setting a baseline for what the definition of feminism is, and then going through a history of where women have been in terms of their rights, in terms of their power, and why feminism is so necessary and is not something that we can afford to be fighting about on two different sides. So, according to the International Women's Development Agency, feminism is quite simply all about genders having equal rights and opportunities. And it doesn't stop with equal rights. It's about respecting diverse women's experiences, identities, knowledge, and strengths, and striving to empower all women to realize their full rights. I think people have been getting so defensive about feminism recently because it's been somehow misconstrued into something that can hurt men. But being a feminist means believing in equal rights for all genders. That's not about putting men down, it's about raising women. Even the IWDA says it's not about women being better than men, it's about eschewing femininity. What I've seen for the polarization of feminism is that it's created two distinct sides, which seem to be abandoning men completely or relying on men completely, marking the movement as something that is centered all around men, no matter what. I think this is very dangerous to see this separation because the only way that something is going to move forward is if we can have work done on both sides to achieve a symbiotic relationship. This is where I think we've gone wrong with our discourse on social media. On one side, you have the self-coined trad wives, Mormon wives, mom talk, the soft girl, clean girl aesthetic that's abandoning the notion of girl boss and embracing traditionally feminine hobbies. On this side of the internet, a woman's main role is a homemaker waiting for their husband to come home. On the other side, women encourage each other to abandon men completely, finding comfort in a space to say I hate men where they won't get ridiculed, building their identities through ways to repel men, with trends like men repellent makeup and anti-male gaze outfits. Both sides seem to believe this is a way to keep their feminine identities empowered.
Hear that screaming inside the capsule.
But when I was first doing research into this, and I did do a lot of research because just because I'm a woman, that does not mean that I know the whole of feminism. Feminism is only effective if you think of every group of women, not just a white young woman like me. And I came across this video on YouTube that had millions of views. Like, seriously, it was the first thing that came up when I searched just general feminism topics. And the title is Modern Feminism Starting to Undermine Itself? Right away in her TED Talk, she describes what she calls a merit-based approach to feminism. And then she says that the gender pay gap, though mostly non-existent, can be mostly explained by the woman's choice to work part-time and that women are choosing different profession types. That was tough for me to see, and even harder when I looked through the comments and saw that everyone was seemingly praising this woman for finally telling the truth. Maybe wages have been evening out and now there's no kind of significant data to show any kind of gender gap, and that is a good thing. I'll agree with that. Oh, how I wished it was true, but according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, women's earnings were 83.6% of men's in 2023. I know that we're in a very data-obsessed world right now, but feminism goes so much deeper than making the same amount of money. Just because the numbers are showing that women are making the same amount as men in the workplace, that doesn't mean that their experience in the workplace isn't vastly different. Women who are ambitious in the workplace are more often called difficult or even annoying, while a man in the same position is called confident. People seem to idolize confident men and fear confident women. She goes on to say that there's no glass ceiling, actually, that it's broken, and the only reason that we don't see more women in higher positions is because fewer women and mothers aspire to be CEOs. Women just don't want to be CEOs.
Women like me are partly responsible for the gender pay gap. And many of us may never go knocking on that glass ceiling because it's simply not a lifestyle that we desire.
And I just want to pause right there, because how can you say that? How do you know that a woman wants to? Women will step back to take care of kids because that is what seems to be expected of them. But that doesn't mean that they don't want for more. Just the fact that you don't see as many male CEOs or males in higher positions stepping back to take care of their kids tells you that. And that is not something that can be explained easily by data. And then she goes on to say her main point of this video, that she fears that feminism is hurting men.
And what about men? Well, there's actually competition here for competitive victimhood if we want to play that game. Men have their own unique set of disadvantages that are rarely up for public discussion.
Can we just get it straight, please, that feminism is not about men? I wonder if along the way we just became so obsessed with feminism meaning equality that we wanted to include everyone in it. But feminism, like many movements, is trying to lift up a historically marginalized group. And to do that, you do have to focus on that historically marginalized group. I will say that does not disclude men. And I think that's where the problem is stemming. Feminism is not about men, but men need to play a role in feminism if we don't want to continue to regress. It's scary to see how just a few years ago we were at the height of the Me Too movement, supporting women for standing up for themselves and not allowing the traditional power dynamics of men to get in the way. But now, in this TED Talk that was the first thing that came up on YouTube about feminism, she speaks about how men have had their careers and reputations ruined by Me Too. That was kind of the point. You're not supposed to have a career or a reputation if you're a rapist. It's almost like feminism as a movement, as a word, as a concept, has been so miscommunicated and misconstrued over social media and traditional media and politics over the years that it's almost become something that women are wanting to turn away from, which I feel like if these women knew what it actually was, they would not be thinking that way at all. And this, unfortunately, is the nature of polarization and a late capitalist society. In a quote by Margaret Atwood in The Guardian, she says that political and religious polarization, which appeared to be on the wane for parts of the 20th century, has increased alarmingly in the past decade. She said, "The world feels to me more like the 1930s and 40s at present than it has in the intervening 80 years. That is something we should be concerned by. Polarization is something that seems to grow stronger when we get more comfortable and power hungry and start turning into this dangerous us versus them mindset. This mindset that comes across because it's almost like we have no other problems to fight for except to pit ourselves against each other. Or otherwise, if there are more important problems that we should be turning our energy to, it's almost like we haven't been educated enough to adopt our critical thinking skills to either be for or against them, and instead we adopt this hive mindset and just pick a side, since picking a side is so much easier than developing your own critical point of view. Men should be welcome into the feminist movement because as much as I want to say that I can do everything without a man, and I believe that I can, I think that in society the way to move an issue forward is to have everyone involved and everyone participating, and men should not get an out just because they're not a female too. And if we try to isolate men outside of the feminist movement and give them an out, then unfortunately progress is not going to happen. I recently came across this Substack article called From Pop Culture to Power: How Society Rewards Men for Less by Elise Unleashed. It talks about how differences between men and women aren't just a quirky social dynamic, and it's actually a systemic issue that has been keeping women exhausted and men comfortable, while women are raised with an unspoken commandment to be exceptional or be invisible, while men seem to receive praise for basic human decency. She says that society more often seems to punish ambitious women while pampering mediocre men. And again, I don't want this to sound like it's a us against them situation, because as we know, that's not going to get us anywhere. But I think that people do need to understand their experience is vastly different. If you look for any kind of article on Substack about feminism or any kind of essay, what you'll find are those two distinct sides that I mentioned. There's an article by Magdalena called "I Hate Men and You Should Too." And it starts off by saying, "I don't understand why women are afraid to say they hate men. I honestly know very few reasons not to hate men. I know there are some feminists who would say, yeah, but they're like that because of patriarchal structures. And to that I say, I don't care. I genuinely don't care. Men would have dismantled patriarchy already if they didn't benefit from it." Based on a woman's own personal experiences, I know that it can be very hard to not blame men, because who else would have gotten us into this position in the first place? But unfortunately, saying I hate men is not going to get feminism anywhere, and it's actually going to prove the other side that feminists are just men-hating people who want to put men down, and then it's not going to get us anywhere. And it sucks. I know it sucks because I know people have had horrible experiences with men, And I know it's hard not to translate that into the whole gender and just want to get rid of them and not deal with them at all. It feels so hard to say because I love feminine rage. I am so for women taking back what was taken from them in books, in media, any kind of Joan of Arc situation. When we think about all the people in history, all the women in history who've been wronged by men, of course I want them to take that back with all of their rage and fury. But in terms of this video essay, I'm talking about the polarization of feminism. This is just another example of how far we've strayed from each other. And it's scary to think about how the movement as a whole might be hurt by this, because what I want and what I think everyone wants is that equality for women. That's not just in the numbers, in the data, but is in the true fabric of life and how women are treated, how women are talked about, and how they experience the world. On the other side of the coin, I found a Substack article by Cleopatra called "Feminism is Out, Adoring Men is In." The subheading being "The Truth About Feminism, the Patriarchy, Why Women Need Men, Adoring Men, and More." This article is so interesting to me because there's a whole section on modern feminism in here that starts off with saying, obviously equal rights matter, but then it puts down the feminist movement as a whole and says that it's hurting us by tearing us apart from each other. It says that labeling this as feminism can cause division and restrict us instead of helping us expand and evolve, and labels are the opposite of freedom. She says her biggest problem with feminism is that it's become a war against masculinity, or against a patriarchy, a term they love to use. This is what I'm talking about. It's so dangerous that people have weaponized feminism as a term and turned it on its head and made it something that's against men. I don't know how many times I have to say this, but feminism is not hurting men. The point of feminism is not to hurt men. Don't be afraid of feminism. If we start to weaponize feminism as a term and as a movement, then this is what's happened. We're gonna have this polarization, and even that word they, a term they love to use, is that whole us versus them mindset. Is it the definition that people aren't understanding? Is it somewhere along the way it got misconstrued? Like the word woke used to belong to people who knew what was going on, and now it's a term that belongs to conservatives to put down liberals. It's this mind-bending way of talking about words and definitions that's pulling us away from each other. Well, we're not even thinking critically about what it actually means. The same with the term patriarchy. That's a whole other thing I could get into. But I think for the sake of this, because I don't want to alienate anyone, and I don't want this to be another video that tears people apart, sets the movement another couple years back, I think what we need to do to really understand where we're at with feminism now is to go through the history of feminism and see where we've been. And I hope that it is just a matter of education, that we've become so lost in this digital culture that feeds us everything we need without critical thinking that maybe it's been lost. So hopefully if someone can get anything out of this, they'll learn why feminism is still a very, very important movement and why we should want to be more united in it than ever and not divided. Okay, so in terms of the history of feminism, it goes back forever. As long as women have existed, there has been some type of feminism that can be talked about. There's just a few distinctive moments in history around the whole world, not just in American history, that I want to bring up from here. As always with history, to understand where we're heading, we need to understand where we've been. Starting with ancient Greece, as you know, one of the most influential cultures and empires in the world, the way that women were treated in ancient Greece is a very interesting study of how far the oppression of women can be pushed. Even from birth, women and girls were at danger. Babies were at risk of being abandoned because they were lesser needed than male babies. And from the time that a little girl was born, her whole purpose was to be a mom, and that's what she was prepped for through her whole childhood. Women couldn't look after their own interests, they had no autonomy, and they were married away to a man without a choice by age 13 or 14. That's a baby. There was no role in society for single female adults. There just wasn't. You had to get married, otherwise you were unnecessary in society. After marriage, contact with non-family males was not allowed, and women usually stayed in the house, completely isolated, under the complete authority of their husbands, and they could not own property. That sounds more like a servant than a person, no? And that's what a whole gender was subjected to for hundreds of thousands of years. And then if we move on to English history and history of the Catholic Church, there's a very famous example of Anne Boleyn, and if you don't know, I'll tell you the story of her now. Anne Boleyn was the second wife of King Henry VIII. Second, because she was more desirable than his first, and so he got rid of his first, and he ended up doing the same to her. After a few years, she was publicly executed because she could not produce a male heir. She only had one female child, and King Henry VIII wanted a different woman in his life because he got bored or for whatever reason. And because the Catholic Church was so entwined with this, divorce was not allowed, so he just beheaded her. Imagine that. As a woman, if you anger your husband, you can get beheaded publicly. Then moving on to the East, Russian literature can tell you a lot about how the culture in the country was like at that time. And in Anna Karenina by Tolstoy, which is a very, very influential book, that depicts 19th century Russia's patriarchal culture, and it shows the societal expectations and the harsh consequences that were placed upon women who deviated from them. There's a few different women characters who have different ideals of life and follow different paths, but it just shows how either way that they're both so stunted and they both really don't have a choice as much as they think they do, and it ends in their demise because there's no other option for them. In the same vein, the story The Darling by Chekhov, and it's one of my favorite Russian stories ever. It's published in 1899. It's about this young woman who suffers from extreme identity and codependency issues, and throughout the whole story, she attaches herself to a man and then makes herself exactly who he is interested in only what he's interested in, and then once he's gone, she realizes that she doesn't have any interests of her own, so she needs to find another man so she can have them. Other women refer to her as Darling to reinforce her subordination to her husband. And the whole point of the story just shows that she cannot live without loving someone. And it's very interesting to think about from a deeper level of why she might feel this way and how modern women might feel this way too, because women have been so trained to attach themselves to men and to follow them and to nurture them. But it creates such an identity issue for women where their selflessness is put at the forefront so much that they don't even have a self. I actually saw this video by this creator named Anna Howard a while ago about how women should be selfish. I think that's a great video to watch on this topic too, and I won't get too much into it because I think you should just watch her video. But women, and mothers especially, are always seen as selfless. People call it as like a compliment almost to them, but in reality, being selfless is not a compliment. And sometimes it's even a punishment for women that's been placed on them by society because they have no choice but to be selfless, but to take care of other people because they're not allowed to own their own selves and their own interests and hold them up high and be confident in them because nobody has made space for them to do so. And yes, both of those Russian books are by male writers, and it is interesting to think about how women were treated from a male point of view. Another example of that is Charles Darwin, as everybody knows, most famous for his thoughts on evolution. Actually has another interesting piece in history, which is this chart that he made when he was considering marrying a woman. I'll put it up right here, but it's so interesting to think about, and how this man who is known as such an intellectual, this is how he thought about women and a woman he was about to marry at the time. He made this chart wondering, should I marry or should I not marry this woman? These are the advantages, these are the disadvantages. For the advantages of why he should marry, he said she would be a constant companion, a friend in old age, an object to be beloved and play with. It's interesting to think about. Someone to take care of the house, charms of music and female chit-chat, children to care for one in old age, better than a dog anyhow. If he didn't marry her, he wouldn't have to worry about quarreling, wouldn't have to worry about visiting relatives, wouldn't be forced to bend to every trifle, would have more money for books, would have time to read books in the evening, and no expenses and anxieties of children. I actually don't know if he ended up marrying this woman. That would be interesting to find out if anyone knows. But just the thought of this is how a man would perceive a woman at this time, someone just barely better than a dog, an object, is scary. And this was in the mid-1800s. And then just because I can't talk about feminism without talking about the women's suffrage movement, I'll fast forward a little bit to the 1965 Voting Rights Act that made voting a reality for black women, which is when we can actually count all women having the right to vote. And 1965. My parents were born just a few years after that. That's barely over 2 generations ago. And we're okay with saying goodbye to feminism now. We're saying we don't need feminism anymore. This has just become a reality that has allowed women of all colors, of all socioeconomic statuses to vote. And we are nowhere near where we need to be. The same year that women are allowed to vote, the National American Women's Suffrage Association disbands. Much like the immediate disbandment, it seems like people are quick to say now that women have the right to vote. Why do we need feminism? What more do women want? But we can't forget, feminism is about equality in all aspects of life. Feminism is about who we allow to have power, who we deny that power and autonomy, but it can't be practiced in a silo. It's a collective effort, and especially in this digital age that we're in, the more that we see this separation, this polarization towards rad wives, women disassociating, bed rotting, dedicating their lives to men, losing all of their ambition, and then we see the other side of women who hate men, who are completely cutting men out of their lives and villainizing the gender as a whole. It creates this divide that is not getting us anywhere. And we can see this in our political culture too. And Susan Jacoby, an American author, says that American political culture speaks to our culture as a whole. In the American political landscape, we see a president with dozens of recorded accusations of sexual assault, and yet he won over a woman candidate both times of his elected presidency, which to some women felt like a message loud and clear in itself. In the current administration, we're now seeing a push for traditional values, especially in the family setting, encouraging women to have more children, with plans for scholarships, baby bonuses, and menstrual cycle classes. And the fact is, most working-class families do not have money to pay for a full-time nanny or daycare, and paid leave policies in America are already paltry compared to other countries, making it all the more likely that more women will have to drop out of the workforce to stay at home or work part-time, as women are already twice as likely to work part-time than men. When we think about the political culture, we can think about abortion, the 14th Amendment. In current events right now, there's the woman in Georgia who is used as an incubator because abortion laws in Georgia require her baby, who is only 9 weeks old, to have more rights than she does. Her autonomy is not respected as much as the baby inside of her. And with abortion specifically, it's scary to think about how we have actually regressed in terms of how many rights women have today, because in certain states, women no longer have the right that they used to have to do that, and they don't have any more rights to do anything else. When you think of this from a law point of view, women also are not included in the Constitution. They're not, as surprising as that may be. The word is men, that all men are created equal, that all men have these rights, and I know that people argue that, oh, that's just how they used to talk about it back then, that's how they talk about it in the Bible. When you say men, you just mean men and women, which could be true, and I could agree with that, but when you think about using these laws and interpreting these laws to give people rights, that means that literally in the law, women do not have the rights. And so if we ever come to a time where that has to be argued, that could be misconstrued, and that could go to say that only men have the rights and women don't, and that is scary. And aside from that fact too, even if you do want to say that men means women and men, when that was first wrote, women did not have the same amount of rights as men. Women did not have the right to vote. So how can you say that they meant men and women when they say men? This is why the ERA, or the Equal Rights Act, has been trying to be passed for decades, though it has never been passed. And I read this interesting article from Smith College with Mona Sinha, a global director of Equality Now, which is a private nonprofit that works to create equality for women and girls in America, and a former senior legislative assistant for the U.S. House of Representatives, Becca DeMonte. They said, according to Equality Now, 80% of Americans believe that women have equal rights under the Constitution, and that shows up in poll after poll. But Sinha says that anytime I tell people that we do not have equal rights in the Constitution, they're shocked. Women, and anyone who's not a man, are left out of the Constitution. How can you be a democracy without every citizen having equal rights? When you think about democracies around the world too, among democratic countries, the U.S. is an outlier when it comes to guaranteeing rights. That means that in America, women do not have the same protections under the law as men. They just don't. But today, 85% of the 193 United Nations member states have a provision in their constitutions that specifically address gender equality, while the United States does not. So when you think about saying that we don't need feminism anymore because women have these rights, and if you do want to think about it from a factual point of view, those are your facts. Women do not have the same amount of rights as men. It's not written anywhere for us. And I did find an article that was able to point out some of the things that I was seeing too about how feminism seems to be taken as a movement that's aimed at destroying men. This article by Girls Globe says that feminism is not a movement aimed at destroying men, but at destroying the patriarchal ideas that are cemented in society. Feminism is not aimed at making men lesser than women, but at improving the status of being a woman so that it's equal to that of being a man. Feminism is not about treating men as trash, but rather pointing out the trash things that some men do to increase the degradation of women. Feminism is not about reversing the status quo and oppressing men, but about challenging the status quo to stop oppressing women. And I think if everyone could understand that, it would really help advance the movement as a whole and stop vilifying it. In Hannah Ferguson's book, Bite Back, Feminism, Media, Politics, and Our Power to Change It All, she says that women are rewarded by patriarchal society for performing traditional femininity, for being soft and gentle. Conversely, men are restricted and punished for emotionality, for having needs and feelings under traditional and toxic forms of masculinity. So it's almost like if you try to throw away feminism, you try to say that it's not helpful and it's hurting men, You actually are hurting men more if that's what you're worried about. Reinforcing these old views of how women fit into society and how men fit into society can be toxic to all of us. And then on top of all the articles that I've seen, all the essays posted on Substack, there's also just the general trends on social media, on TikTok, on Instagram, things like trad wives, even Nara Smith and Emily Mariko, these women who go viral for staying at home and living this soft life while their husband is out working or doing whatever he dreamed of. And the scary part is that the reason it's going viral is because it almost seems easier. Emmeline Klein wrote this article a while ago called "The Smartest Women I Know Are All Disassociating," coining the term dissociative feminism that was actually written a while ago, but I think is still so relevant today. She says, "I've noticed a lot of brilliant women giving up on shouting and complaining and instead talking on a darkly comic, deadpan tone when writing about their feminism. This approach presents overtly horrifying facts about uniquely feminine struggles and delivers them flatly, dripping with sarcasm. Maybe it's a curdling of the hyper-optimistic hashtag girlboss. Run the world girls feminism of the aughts, characterized by an uneasy combination of plaintive begging and swaggering confidence that gender equality was just past the horizon line. So instead, we now seem to be interiorizing our existential aches and angst, smirking knowingly at them and numbing ourselves to maintain our nonchalance. Let's call it dissociative feminism." She goes on to explain examples from really popular shows like Sex and the City, Girls, Fleabag, who show all of these white privileged women who are pretty, white, cisgender, and tortured enough to be interesting, but not enough to be repulsive, and often described as relatable, while to most people, it's not relatable at all. And because we see these characters in pop culture and interiorize them into our lives, it's almost like, well, if these privileged women are giving up and can't go through it all, I might as well give up because what can I do? And giving up on this progress has almost become the epitome of white feminism, which can explain why we're so polarized today and why it's like we've almost regressed from where we've been before. This is not a good trend. All these archetypes contribute to almost that same cool girl that we all read about in Gillian Flynn's Gone Girl, that monologue that stayed in our heads.
Cool girl. Men always use that, don't they, as their defining compliment. She's a cool girl. Cool girl is hot. Cool girl is game. Cool girl is fun. Cool girl never gets angry at her man. She only smiles in a chagrin-loving manner.
About how men prefer a girl who's down, a girl who is willing to do whatever they want, whether it's performative or not. It's women like the woman in Chekhov's Darling. It's like we all should become darlings and take on the interests of men instead because it's easier, right? Well, it might be easier. It's so much scarier. Virginia Woolf's 1929 essay, A Room of One's Own, is a foundational feminist text that explores how women need certain conditions met to allow their equality and success, two of them being financial independence and a room of their own. Without financial independence and intellectual freedom, women are less likely to be able to pursue their creative ambitions in the first place, making it hard to dream for anything more than a life taking care of a home, kids, and a husband. She points out that even if women did try to create anything at the time, they were constantly being made aware of how they were less capable, less intelligent, and had a lower position than men, and so there was no space for their work to compete at all. And because women were so restricted, it begs the question, how could they know what they desired or dreamed if they hadn't even been given the chance to consider it in the first place? Disassociating is dangerous. Being down, being the chill girl, letting things happen is dangerous. We should all be standing up for this movement that we believe in, men and women, so that we can finally get to that place of equality that we've all dreamed of, that will make life better for everyone and will not be putting down the other gender, because that is not the point. So I guess the point is that you're allowed to hate men, okay? If you want to hate men, hate men. You can like and dislike whoever you want. That's the point of having your own brain and your own thoughts and your own opinions. But you can't erase men as much as you want to, so we have to find a way to confront these issues as a whole society together, and we can do that, I think, by educating each other, by being very clear on what it is that we're fighting for so that we don't end up just fighting with each other and getting nowhere, and refusing to conform to tradition. Because if we don't do anything, we will regress. That is just how it works. If you don't continue to go forward, you will move backwards. I think there's some great feminist examples in history too that we can talk about that kind of shed a positive light, ways that we can try instead of just disassociating and acting like there's nothing more that can be done. George Sand is an amazing author, a woman author who used the name George to write so she could be under this man's moniker, and she wrote about unequal power dynamics in relationships, like limitations on women in marriages, and strong women who challenge social norms. She advocated for universal suffrage in the 1848 revolutions across Europe, which led to more liberal governments, ideals, and social reforms. There's so many great quotes from her and from her books, but I just wanted to mention a few. "You can bind my body, tie my hands, govern my actions. You are the strongest, and society adds to your power. But with my will, sir, you can do nothing. This is her talking to men. The world will know and understand me someday, but if that day does not arrive, it does not greatly matter. I shall have opened the way for other women. And that's how we should be thinking. The allure of being the chill girl, of being liked by a man for a second, of him being interested in you because you're interested in what he's in, is not enough. Don't let it be enough. Don't disassociate. Stand up for what you believe in, men and women, and make sure you know why you believe in it too. And that is also where nuance comes in. Not everything is black and white in us versus them. There is nuance in everything. In Little Women, the book, and more specifically, I'm talking about the Greta Gerwig film adaptation of it, I think there's such a great line in this quote that I just want to show here.
If I was a girl in a book, this would all be so easy. You know, I just feel like women, they have minds and they have souls as well as just hearts, and they've got ambition and they've got talent as well as just beauty. And I'm so sick of people saying that love is just all a woman is fit for. I'm so sick of it. But I'm so lonely.
Jo is one of the sisters who's known as the independent woman, and it shows how it's hard for her to find herself in a society that requires women to attach themselves to men while she wants to go off on her own and be ambitious, and it becomes hard for her. But it shows that even though she has this ambition, she can still feel lonely. You can have this ambition and you can still love men and want to be in a relationship with them. You can want to be independent and you can want to get married. You can want to be ambitious and you can want to have children. I think that's the whole point of feminism, that we have the right to do whatever we want. It's not pushing extreme one way or another, being a trad wife or being a lonely CEO who hates men. There's an in-between, and you're allowed to have it and be a feminist and to push for female rights and still have men in your life. We're just too often pitting each other against each other, pushing us versus them, and we're forgetting how to think critically. We're forgetting that nuance ever even existed, when really we should be taking a second and thinking and creating our own opinions. Most of all, we should not be giving up. So that's a little rundown on feminism, of how I feel about it, and what I've just seen in social media discourse and essays and different articles. And yes, this is my opinion, so you can think about it what you want. But whatever you do, please have an opinion, because that's what we need to be doing, is thinking more critically about this. I do have a few book recommendations I'll put up on the screen here. Some of my favorite authors that deal with a lot of feminist topics, because something I've learned in the process of educating myself is that history and facts are all very, very important. But what really matters is empathy, and reading fiction can help increase your empathy and see what life might be like from other people's point of view. So maybe give it a try. That is all I have for today, but I hope to see you for another vaguely related episode in the next few weeks. Bye!